Most people drive through small American towns and see the same thing. Boarded shop fronts, empty lots, a main street that went quiet a generation ago. But in dozens of these towns, something has been happening that almost nobody sees. Jewish communities have been walking into the places the rest of the country wrote off and rebuilding them. Towns where Sephardic kitchens have not closed in 4 generations. Streets where Orthodox families signed leases on buildings no one else would touch. And by the end, you will understand exactly why they keep winning. It begins with the scent of za'atar through a kitchen window open since morning. They are not Ashkenazi. They are not Hasidic. They are Syrian Jews. Their families trace a line from the ancient souks of Aleppo and Damascus, through the tenements of the Lower East Side, through the brownstones of Bensonhurst, through the grand apartment buildings lining Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn, and from there to this silent, manicured borough on the shore. In the 2000 census, Deal had the highest percentage of Syrian Americans of any municipality in the entire United States. Its permanent population hovers around 750. Every summer, that number swells past 6,000. And it has 6 synagogues, all of them following Syrian and Egyptian Orthodox traditions, in a town most New Jerseyans could not find on a map. This is not a retirement colony. This is not a resort town. This is a node in a network that stretches from the Middle East to Brooklyn to the Jersey Shore to Aventura, Florida. And that network was not designed by urban planners or developers. It was shaped by a rabbinical edict signed in 1935. The question this story tries to answer is simple enough to ask. What is it about Sephardic and Mizrahi Jewish culture, its particular relationship to family, commerce, geography, and memory, that allows these communities to build themselves into places the rest of America does not even notice? The first Syrian Jews to reach American soil were Jacob Dweck and Ezra Sitt, both from Aleppo. They sailed from Liverpool, England on July 22, 1892, aboard the Germania. They landed in a country that did not know what to make of them. They were Jewish, but they did not speak Yiddish. They were Arab, but they were not Muslim. They arrived carrying a language and a liturgy and a cuisine that belonged to neither of the categories America had prepared for them. More families followed in the early 1900s. 3 forces pushed them out of Syria. The economy in Aleppo was collapsing. The Young Turks, who had overthrown the Ottoman Sultan, were conscripting Jewish men into the military. And the rise of Zionism in the region had triggered a new strain of anti-Semitism that made daily life dangerous. They settled first on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. They opened textile shops and small trading businesses along Washington Street and Rector Street. They prayed in rented rooms. Then came the first transplantation. In the 1940s and 50s, the wealthiest Syrian Jewish families in New York began purchasing homes along Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn. Within a few years, the entire community had followed. The writer Joseph Sutton later called this stretch of Brooklyn by a name that stuck. He called it Aleppo in Flatbush. The Great Dome Sanctuary of Shar Zion Congregation rose on Ocean Parkway between Avenues T and U. Its stone facade and towering arch became the architectural anchor of a community that now numbered in the tens of thousands. The synagogue was not just a place of worship. It was the center of gravity around which every other institution arranged itself. But the decision that truly defined this community was not architectural. It was legal. In 1935, facing the full force of American assimilation, several leading Syrian rabbis signed a takana. This is a binding rabbinical edict. It declared that members of the community could not marry non-Jews. It laid down an absolute baseline. The community would refuse to recognize any converts to Judaism whatsoever, regardless of the validity of the conversion elsewhere. The edict was not a suggestion. It was enforced through communal pressure, through the synagogues, through the schools, through the social networks that governed every aspect of daily life. It was reaffirmed in 1946, in 1972, in 1984, and again in 2006. One community elder, speaking publicly about the edict decades later, explained it in terms that carried no apology. He said it was not about exclusion, it was about survival. When you arrive in a country that wants you to disappear into it, he said, you need a wall, not a wall against the world. A wall around the garden. The numbers tell the rest of that story. The rate of intermarriage with non-Jews in the Syrian community is believed to be less than 3%. In the broader American Jewish population, that figure reaches as high as 50%. Most immigrant communities in the 20th century lost their ethnic distinctiveness within 2 or 3 generations. The Syrian Jewish community did the opposite. Each generation emerged more cohesive than the last. Deal, New Jersey entered the picture in the 1960s. The community had been vacationing together in nearby Bradley Beach for decades. Families rented summer cottages in clusters, walking to makeshift prayer services in rented halls, gathering on the boardwalk after Shabbat. When the time came to build something permanent along the shore, they chose Deal. By 1973, the community numbered more than 100 homeowners. That same year, after a 15-year effort, the Synagogue of Deal was dedicated on Norwood Avenue. It was the first synagogue ever built in the borough. Its distinctive octagonal shape became the landmark of a community that had, once again, moved together. A longtime Deal resident and community historian has explained what the outside world misunderstood about those early years. He says that when families first moved from Bradley Beach, people on the outside thought it was just wealthy people buying beach houses. They did not understand that this was a community moving as one body. That the synagogue came first, and the houses followed. That the whole point was to be within walking distance of one another on the Sabbath. On a Friday afternoon in July, the Aaron Deal carries salt from the Atlantic. The streets are wide and lined with tall hedges that obscure houses large enough to hold 3 generations. Some properties share tennis courts and swimming pools between family compounds, rather than fencing themselves off from each other in the manner of the Hamptons. On Norwood Avenue, the commercial strip, kosher restaurants, and cafes fill with voices speaking Arabic and Hebrew alongside English. Children walk in groups toward the synagogue. The smell of kibbeh and sfiha drifts from open kitchen windows. The bakeries are finishing their last trays of ka'ak, the sesame-crusted bread rings that have accompanied Shabbat in Syrian households for centuries. The weekly rhythm builds towards Saturday morning. Families walk to the synagogue together. The liturgy inside follows the Aleppo rite, chanted in a style that would have been recognizable in northern Syria 200 years ago. The Hazan, the cantor, selects a makam for the week. This is a system of musical modes that matches the melody of prayer to the emotional tone of that week's Torah reading. A week of mourning receives one mode. A week of celebration receives another. The sound is closer to the classical music of the Arab world than to anything an Ashkenazi congregation would recognize. After services, the community gathers in the social hall. Business is discussed alongside family news. Introductions are made between young people. Matches are considered. This is where the community quietly governs itself, not through formal votes, but through conversation and consensus over plates of food. A shopkeeper near Norwood Avenue explains that every person who walks through his door on a weekday also sits beside him on Saturday morning. There is no transaction here, he says. That is only a transaction. Everything carries the weight of the relationship behind it. Deal is not an island. It is one point in a triangle. The same families who fill these streets every summer return to Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn each autumn. And in the winter months, many of them migrate south to Aventura, Florida. The Edmund J. Safra Synagogue in Aventura began in the early 1990s as a handful of men meeting in a small room in the North Tower of Turnberry Isle. They gathered on Saturday mornings and said their prayers. During the week, they prayed at various small synagogues along Dixie Highway or above the police station at Aventura Mall. Within 2 decades, that small prayer group had become a full congregation with a permanent sanctuary and a growing community around it. This is the replication pattern. A few families arrive, they find a place to pray. The place to pray becomes a permanent synagogue. The synagogue becomes a gravity well. More families arrive, schools open, kosher businesses follow. Within a generation, the place is transformed. And this pattern is not limited to Syrian Jews. In Great Neck, on the north shore of Long Island, a community of Persian Jews has grown quietly since the early 1980s. They arrived fleeing persecution after the 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran. A 2011 Jewish community survey found that 38% of Great Neck's Jewish households include someone who identifies as Sephardic, overwhelmingly of Iranian descent. The Iranian Jewish population of Long Island, concentrated almost entirely in the Great Neck Peninsula, is roughly 15,000 strong. Great Neck is now, after Borough Park, the most Jewish area in the entire New York City region. The Mashhadi Jewish Center on Great Neck Road serves a community that traces its origins to the city of Mashhad in northeastern Iran. In Forest Hills, Queens, along 108th Street, a stretch that locals call Bukharian and Broadway, the storefronts are filled with Bukharian restaurants and gift shops, their signs written in Cyrillic and English. The Bukharian Jews began arriving from Uzbekistan in the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union. There are now an estimated 50,000 Bukharian Jews in New York City. Nearly all of them live in Queens. In 30 years, the number of Bukharian synagogues in the area has grown from 1 to 40. A Bukharian rabbi in Queens explains that Sephardic culture teaches from a young age to stay around family. The difference between Ashkenazi and Sephardic life, he says, is that Sephardic children grow up expecting to live near their parents and grandparents. Multi-generational households are not a sign of financial hardship. They are the default. But cohesion of this kind has costs that the community itself debates in private and occasionally in public. The 1935 edict remains a subject of deep disagreement. Supporters argue that it has been the single most effective tool of cultural preservation in American Jewish life. They point to the 3% intermarriage rate. They point to the unbroken chain of Aleppo liturgy sung every Saturday in Deal and Brooklyn and Aventura. Opponents, including some within the Orthodox world, argue that the low intermarriage rate has more to do with widespread attendance at Orthodox day schools than with the edict itself. They note that other Orthodox communities achieve similarly low rates without any equivalent ban. In Great Neck, a new generation of American-born Persian Jews is pushing against the boundaries their parents carefully maintained. Some are marrying Ashkenazi Jews, something that would have been unthinkable a generation ago. In Queens, young Bukharian families face rising housing costs that push them toward neighborhoods where the community infrastructure does not yet exist. The gravitational pull of the broader American culture works on every generation, quietly, constantly. A second-generation Persian Jewish woman who grew up in Great Neck speaks of the particular vertigo of belonging to two worlds at once. She describes feeling deeply connected to the community that raised her and sometimes distant from the country that surrounds it. Leaving, she says, feels like a kind of betrayal. Staying requires a daily act of choice. In Deal, the community's wealth brings its own form of exposure. A handful of powerful families own billions of dollars of commercial real estate in New York City. Along the oceanfront, family compounds sit side by side on some of the most valuable land in New Jersey. This visibility attracts media coverage that often frames the community through the lens of excess. The reality is more complex. The wealth is communal as much as it is personal. It funds the synagogues, the schools, the social services, the summer programs that hold the next generation in place. And then there is the deeper invisibility. When Americans think of Jewish life, they think of Ashkenazi culture, the delicatessens, the Yiddish theater, the suburban Reform temple. The Sephardic story, equally old and equally American, is almost never told. Scholars of American Jewish history have noted that the dominance of Ashkenazi culture in the United States resulted in the marginalization of Sephardic Jews in national life. The Syrian community of Brooklyn, the Persian community of Great Neck, the Bukharian community of Queens. These are American stories that most Americans have never encountered. A Saturday morning in Deal, late August. The ocean is audible from behind the hedgerows, but not quite visible. The streets carry the kind of silence that arrives not from absence, but from intention. A father and two young boys walk toward the synagogue on Norwood Avenue. The boys wear white shirts. The younger one carries a small leather-bound prayer book pressed against his chest. A woman in a doorway on a side street calls out a greeting to a neighbor passing on foot. The word she uses is Arabic. Inside the sanctuary, the Hazan begins the Maqam for this week's Torah portion. The melody has traveled from Aleppo to the Lower East Side to Bensonhurst to Ocean Parkway to this octagonal building on a street most Americans will never walk down. It has crossed oceans and centuries, and the kind of loss that is supposed to end a tradition rather than deepen it. The families who walk these streets every Saturday did not come here because the houses were beautiful or the town was famous. They came because other families like them were already here, and those families came because a synagogue was here. And the synagogue was here because in 1973, a small group of people decided that a community deserved a permanent address. The youngest children on these streets will never know a time when this was not home. The Hazan's voice carries through the open windows. The Atlantic breaks against the shore 3 blocks east. The melody does not end. It only waits for next week. Word of a kitchen door closes in a town most Americans will never see, and the last trace of cumin settles into the plaster where it has lived for decades. But there are places on this map where Jewish life did not merely settle into a neighborhood, but became the neighborhood so completely and so unselfconsciously that the calendar, the economy, the language children hear before they hear English, the butcher and the baker and the shul all stacked on a single block, added up to an entire grammar of the world. A community so dense and so rooted that the surrounding culture had to negotiate with it rather than absorb it. And what you are about to see is the most quietly extraordinary story on this list, hiding in plain sight. On a Thursday afternoon in Lakewood, New Jersey, the air smells like yeast and sugar. Kosher bakeries along the main commercial roads stack challahs 5 deep in their windows. Young mothers push double strollers past Judaica shops with silver candelabras in the display cases. Men in dark suits walk between study halls with the quick, purposeful stride of people who know exactly where they are going and when they need to arrive. The Lakewood Shopper, one of several flourishing community weeklies, runs more than 170 pages of adverts. Kosher Chinese restaurants, kitchen remodelers, travel agencies, wedding halls. Every page speaks of a community not just surviving, but expanding at a pace that defies every assumption about small-town America. The median age here is 21.7 years. In the rest of Ocean County, that number is 42.7. This is not a retirement community or a college town. This is something else entirely. And the question that hangs over every street corner, every new housing development, every crowded yeshiva hallway is simple. What do Orthodox Jews see in a place like this that everyone else has missed? The answer begins in 1943. A Lithuanian rabbi named Aharon Kotler arrived in Lakewood with a vision that most Jewish leaders in America thought was delusional. Kotler had survived the destruction of European Jewish life. He had led a yeshiva in the town of Kletsk, in what is now Belarus. Most of his 300 students had perished in the Holocaust. He carried with him the weight of everything that had been lost, and an almost stubborn belief that it could be rebuilt. He needed a quiet place, somewhere removed from the noise and distractions of New York City, but close enough to reach it. Lakewood had once been a fashionable winter resort. The Rockefellers and the Goulds had kept estates here in the late 1800s. Grand hotels lined the lakefront. But by the 1940s, the glamour had faded. The hotels stood half empty. The town was affordable and overlooked. Nobody else wanted it for what Kotler needed. He founded Beth Midrash Govoha in a modest building with just 13 students. It was the first kollel in the United States. A kollel is a center of advanced religious study for married men who receive a modest stipend while studying Torah full-time. The idea that men would devote their entire adult lives to religious scholarship in America was considered absurd. Marshall Sclair, the influential Jewish sociologist, wrote in 1955 that the history of Orthodox Judaism in the United States could be written in terms of institutional decay. He believed it was a tradition that would quietly fade in the New World. That prediction could not have been more wrong. Aaron Kotler, the founder's grandson, has spoken publicly about what Lakewood was like when he was a child. He recalls that there were only 3 Orthodox children in the entire township. He once visited Brooklyn for the Sabbath and saw 30 or 40 children gathered in an afternoon group. He thought it must be the International Convention of Orthodox Jewish Children. He did not know there were that many in the entire world. The mechanism that turned Lakewood from a fading resort town into one of the fastest growing municipalities in America is not wealth. It is not politics. It is religious law. Every Friday at sundown, a 25-hour period begins in which observant Jews cannot drive. They cannot use electricity. They cannot carry objects outside the home unless an ERUV, a symbolic boundary made of wire and posts, surrounds the neighborhood. This means everything a family needs must exist within walking distance. The synagogue, the school, the kosher grocery, the mikveh, the bakery. This single requirement produces, by accident, exactly what urban planners spend decades trying to engineer. Dense, walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods where people know their neighbors because they pass them on foot every single week. The yeshiva sits at the center like a gravity well. Young men come to study, they marry, they stay. Their children fill the schools. New families arrive to be near the institutions. About 1,000 new families move to Lakewood every year. The same blueprint appeared in Orange County, New York. In the 1970s, Grand Rebbe Joel Teitelbaum led a group of Satmar Hasidic followers to a remote wooded area 55 miles north of Manhattan. They called it Kiryas Joel. The village grew 63% between 2010 and 2020 alone, from just over 20,000 to nearly 33,000. It appeared almost overnight on the map of America's fastest-growing places. In Postville, Iowa, 30 minutes from the nearest fast food restaurant, Lubavitcher Hasidim from Brooklyn arrived to run the largest kosher meat plant in the country. A farming town that had been bleeding residents suddenly counted 30 ethnicities among its growing population. The pattern repeats. Find a place that others have abandoned. Build the institutional infrastructure first. Let the community grow around it like a living thing. But what does it feel like from the inside? Thursday in Lakewood is preparation day. The rhythms of the week build toward the Sabbath like a tide pulling inward. At the Tomche Shabbos warehouse, the largest kosher food pantry in New Jersey, volunteers sort and pack boxes of chicken, fish, challah, and staples. More than 1,250 families in Lakewood depend on these deliveries for their Sabbath meals. Dedicated drivers load their cars and fan out across the township. By Friday afternoon, every box will have reached its destination. This is not optional charity. It is structural. The median household income in Lakewood is roughly $44,700. The county average is closer to $65,000. But the average household here has 5.12 people compared to 2.61 in the rest of Ocean County. These are large families on modest incomes. The mutual aid networks, the food pantries, the interest-free loan societies, the clothing exchanges. These are not extras. They are load-bearing walls. One Tomche Shabbos delivery driver describes the work simply. He says every box means another family has what it needs. He drives his route like any other delivery driver would. No ceremony, no recognition. The dignity of the process, he explains, is the point. Late in the evening, the study halls of Beth Midrash Govoha are still full. Rows of paired desks stretch the length of enormous rooms. Young men sit across from each other, rocking gently over open volumes of the Talmud, tracing lines of text with their fingers, debating in hushed voices that occasionally rise into something closer to argument. As of 2025, the yeshiva enrolls over 9,000 full-time male students across 74 affiliated institutions. This makes it one of the largest post-secondary institutions of any kind in New Jersey. The sound inside these halls is unlike anything in a university library. It is the sound of 2,000 simultaneous conversations happening at once, a low roar of study that continues until well past midnight. Friday afternoon arrives, and the acceleration is visible. Bakeries push out their final trays. Kosher butchers wrap their last cuts. The streets fill with a particular kind of urgency that has nothing to do with panic and everything to do with purpose. Then sundown comes, and then silence. The commercial streets empty. The car parks go still. Families walk to synagogue in clusters, fathers holding the hands of small children, older boys walking in groups of 3 or 4. For 25 hours, a city of more than 135,000 people enters a different mode of being. A shopkeeper on one of the main commercial streets explains that every customer who walks through his door is also a neighbor. There is no anonymity in Lakewood, he says. If you sell someone a bad piece of fish on Thursday, you will sit next to him in synagogue on Saturday morning. What strikes you first in the residential streets is the children. The school district provides busing to students enrolled at 74 yeshivas. Children on scooters line the pavements. Pairs of girls in matching uniforms walk to school carrying book bags nearly as large as they are. In Kiryas Joel, the numbers are even more striking. The largest single age group in the village is children under 5, numbering more than 7,000 and comprising over 19% of the total population. More than half of the village is under 18. These are not communities in decline. They are communities in acceleration. And as Lakewood fills, the pattern radiates outward. Young Orthodox families seeking more space and affordable homes have moved into Jackson Township, just across the border. Kosher grocery chains and Judaica stores have opened branches on the edges of Tom's River to serve both communities. The same thing is happening in Orange County, where developers have cast their gaze further north toward the foot of the Catskills, looking for quiet villages where the land is still cheap. And in newer destinations far from the traditional northeastern corridor, Orthodox families have begun arriving in Orlando, drawn by affordable housing and a growing kosher infrastructure. But growth at this speed does not happen in a vacuum. The expansion that transformed Lakewood from a fading township into the 5th largest municipality in New Jersey has produced real friction with neighboring communities. Residents of nearby towns point to overdevelopment, where multifamily dwellings have replaced single-family houses and natural woodland. They raise concerns about a public school system under fiscal strain and about a township that has changed beyond recognition within a single generation. The phrase Lakewood-style development has become shorthand in local political debates. In Tom's River, yard signs appeared on front lawns reading, "Do not sell and Tom's River strong." The message was not subtle. The economics are genuinely complicated. Tax-exempt properties owned by private schools, charities, and religious institutions make up 8% of Lakewood's total assessed value, according to county tax data. In Tom's River, that figure is 1.5%. The public school system serves a shrinking share of the township's children, while the municipality funds busing for thousands of yeshiva students. Residents outside the Orthodox community feel they are funding a system they do not benefit from. The community responds that its members pay taxes, support local businesses, and generate the economic activity that rescued Lakewood from decades of decline. Both sides have numbers that support their position. Neither side is entirely wrong. In Postville, Iowa, the tensions took a different and more painful form. When the old high-grade meatpacking plant went under, a Lubavitcher businessman named Shalom Rubashkin bought it and transformed it into a glatt kosher processing facility. The town was saved from economic collapse, but the cultural gulf was enormous. Some Postville residents had never met a Jewish person or heard a foreign language outside of Spanish class. Then in 2008, a massive federal immigration raid at the plant led to the arrest of nearly 400 undocumented workers. The plant went into bankruptcy. Its chief executive was convicted. The Jewish community shrank by roughly half, from about 100 families to around 50. A Postville town councilor named Bob Schroeder said plainly that the newcomers had saved the town from what he called a slow death. He said the community had been reinvigorated, that there was life, that he had made many friends from all over the world, and they were very good people. His words carried no romance and no agenda, just an honest accounting of what he saw with his own eyes. The narrator of this story does not resolve the tension because it remains unresolved. These communities bring growth, institutional investment, and new life to places that were losing all three. They also bring change that is rapid, visible, and culturally unfamiliar to the people who were there first. In Tom's River, interfaith dialogues have been initiated between long-standing residents and Orthodox leaders to find common ground. Some places are finding a way through, others are still searching. The story has no ending because the story is still being written. Saturday morning in Lakewood. The streets carry that particular silence that comes not from absence, but from intention. Families walk in small groups toward their synagogues. A father holds the hand of a boy who cannot be more than 4. An older man in a black coat walks slowly, unhurried, his prayer book tucked under his arm. The bakeries are shuttered. The car parks are full, but no engine turns over. 82 years ago, a man who had lost nearly everything arrived in a town that was losing the same. He had 14 students and an idea the rest of the world considered impossible. His grandson has said that he was completely countercultural. He was a revolutionary who believed that traditional Judaism could not only survive in America, but flourish. That yeshivas could be built here. That a life organized entirely around study and faith could take root in soil that had never held it before. The streets on this Saturday morning hold no monuments, no plaques, no declarations of what was accomplished. Only the sound of shoes on pavement and children calling to one another in a language that was supposed to disappear. The oldest residents remember when this was a town of boarding houses and empty hotels. The youngest will never know it as anything other than home. The avenue has gone dark and the last handshake of the day dissolves into the Sabbath quiet. But what comes next is something else entirely. Communities that did not wait for an invitation. They walked into dying towns carrying lumber through doors that were boarded shut. They brought bread before they brought blueprints. They swept floors that had not known a broom in a decade and argued over paint colors in rooms where the ceiling still leaked. Children ran in buildings that the county had already written off. There was noise where there had been silence, and then there was light where there had been rot. They worked within local frameworks, obtaining permits to transform these spaces under existing zoning laws and city councils, old as the instinct to claim ground and make it speak again. To insist with your bare hands that a place is not finished simply because everyone with a briefcase decided it was. The median age in this township is 18.1 years. Nearly half of all residents are under 18. The yeshiva at its center now enrolls nearly 15,000 full-time students and advanced scholars, all of them male. The Community Weekly newspaper runs over 170 pages of advertisements. This is not a college town. This is not a retirement village. This is something else entirely. On a Thursday afternoon in Lakewood, New Jersey, the air smells like yeast and sugar. Kosher bakeries along the main commercial road stack challahs 5 deep in their windows. Young mothers push double strollers past Judaica shops where silver candelabras fill the display cases. Men in dark suits walk between study halls with the quick, purposeful stride of people who know exactly where they need to be and when they must arrive. A shopkeeper on one of the main commercial streets explains that every customer who walks through his door is also a neighbor. There is no anonymity in Lakewood, he says. If you sell someone a bad piece of fish on Thursday, you will sit next to him in synagogue on Saturday morning. That single observation tells you more about how this place works than any census report ever could. So, what do Orthodox Jews see in a town like this that everyone else has missed? And how does a set of religious rules, written thousands of years ago, produce what no government program or corporate incentive has managed to build? The answer begins in the wreckage of 1943. Lakewood was once among the most fashionable winter retreats in America. In the late 1800s, the Rockefellers and the Goulds kept estates along the lakefront. Grover Cleveland had a winter cottage here. Mark Twain was a frequent visitor. Grand hotels lined the water. But by the 1940s, the glamour had faded. The hotels stood half empty. The town was affordable, quiet, and overlooked. Into this fading resort arrived a Lithuanian rabbi named Aharon Kotler. He had led a yeshiva in the town of Kletsk in what is now Belarus. Most of his 300 students had perished in the Holocaust. He carried the weight of everything that had been lost and an almost stubborn belief that it could be rebuilt. Kotler agreed to lead a new institution on one condition: it had to be moved away from New York City. He needed quiet. He needed distance from distraction. Lakewood, cheap and ignored and close enough to reach Manhattan by car, was precisely what nobody else wanted. He founded Beth Midrash Govoha in a modest building with just 13 students enrolled at the start. It was one of the first major kollels in the United States, where students received a modest stipend while studying Torah full-time. The idea that grown men would devote their entire adult lives to religious scholarship in post-war America was considered absurd. The influential Jewish sociologist Marshall Sclair wrote in 1955 that the history of Orthodox Judaism in America could be written in terms of institutional decay. He believed it was a tradition that would quietly fade in the New World. That prediction could not have been more wrong. Aaron Kotler, the founder's grandson, has spoken publicly about what Lakewood was like when he was a child. He recalls that there were only 3 Orthodox children in the entire township. He once visited Brooklyn for the Sabbath and saw 30 or 40 children gathered in an afternoon group. He thought it must be the International Convention of Orthodox Jewish Children. He did not know there were that many in the entire world. That memory belongs to a place that no longer exists. The mechanism that turned Lakewood from a fading resort into one of the fastest growing municipalities in America is not wealth. It is not politics. It is religious law. Every Friday at sundown, a 25-hour period begins during which observant Jews cannot drive. They cannot use electricity. They cannot carry objects outside the home unless a symbolic boundary called an eruv surrounds the neighborhood. This means everything a family needs must exist within walking distance. The synagogue, the school, the kosher grocery, the mikveh, the bakery. This single requirement produces, by structural necessity, exactly what urban planners spend decades trying to engineer: walkable, dense, mixed-use neighborhoods where people know their neighbors because they pass them on foot every single week. The yeshiva sits at the center, like a gravity well. Young men come to study, they marry, they stay. Their children fill the schools. New families arrive to be near the institutions. About 1,000 new families move to Lakewood every year, and Lakewood is not an isolated case. In the 1970s, Grand Rebbe Joel Teitelbaum led a group of Satmar Hasidic followers to a remote wooded area in Orange County, New York, 55 miles north of Manhattan. They called it Kiryas Joel. It began with a founding population of 500. Today, it holds over 39,000 residents. In Postville, Iowa, 30 minutes from the nearest fast food restaurant, Lubavitcher Hasidim from Brooklyn arrived to run a kosher meat plant. A farming town whose population had been in steady decline since the 1970s suddenly came back to life. The pattern is the same in every case. Find a place that others have abandoned. Build the institutional infrastructure first. Let the community grow around it like a living thing. But what does it actually feel like from the inside? Thursday in Lakewood is Preparation Day. The rhythms of the week build toward the Sabbath like a tide pulling inward. At the Tamchi Shabbos Warehouse, the largest kosher food pantry in New Jersey, volunteers sort and pack boxes of chicken, fish, challah, and staples. More than 1,250 families in Lakewood depend on these deliveries for their Sabbath meals. Tamchi Shabbos is a $14 million organization supporting over 2,400 families at different tiers throughout the year. Dedicated drivers load their cars and fan out across the township. By Friday afternoon, every box will have reached its destination. One Tamchi Shabbos delivery driver describes the work simply. He says every box means another family has what it needs. He drives his route like any other delivery driver would. No ceremony, no recognition. The dignity of the process, he explains, is the point. This is not optional charity. It is structural. The average household in Lakewood has more than 5 people, compared to 2.6 in the rest of Ocean County. More than 20% of Lakewood families live in poverty. These are large families on modest incomes. The mutual aid networks, the food pantries, the interest-free loan societies, the clothing exchanges, these are not extras. They are load-bearing walls. Remove any one of them and the structure above begins to crack. The interest-free loan societies alone tell a story that numbers struggle to capture. A young couple preparing for their first child can borrow for medical costs without paying a single cent of interest. A family whose furnace breaks in January can have cash in hand by that evening. The loans are repaid quietly over months or years. No collectors knock at doors. No credit scores are damaged. The system runs on trust and on the understanding that the borrower of today becomes the lender of tomorrow. In a community where so many families live close to the margin, this network functions less like a charitable program and more like a circulatory system. It keeps the blood moving to every limb. Late in the evening, the study halls of Beth Midrash Govoha are still full. Rows of paired desks stretch the length of enormous rooms. Young men sit across from each other, rocking gently over open volumes of the Talmud, tracing lines of text with their fingers, debating in hushed voices that occasionally rise into something closer to argument. Studies are carried out in over 200 small groups called chaburos, each pursuing its own curriculum with an emphasis on individual learning. The yeshiva now enrolls more than 9,600 students across its affiliated institutions. The sound inside these halls is unlike anything in a university library. It is the sound of thousands of simultaneous conversations, a low roar of study that continues well past midnight. Friday afternoon arrives and the acceleration is visible. Bakeries push out their final trays. Kosher butchers wrap their last cuts. The streets fill with a particular kind of urgency that has nothing to do with panic and everything to do with purpose. Then sundown comes, and then silence. The commercial streets empty. The car parks go still. Families walk to synagogue in clusters. Fathers hold the hands of small children. Older boys walk in groups of 3 or 4. For 25 hours, a township of more than 140,000 people enters a different mode of being. What strikes you first in the residential streets is the children. The school district provides busing to 74 yeshivas. Children on scooters line the pavements. Pairs of girls in matching uniforms walk to school carrying book bags nearly as large as they are. The largest single age group in Lakewood is children under 5, numbering over 22,800 and comprising nearly 17% of the total population. In Kiryas Joel, the proportions are even more striking. More than 58% of residents are under the age of 18. A village administrator named Gedalye Segedin has explained the dynamics plainly. He says that 3 religious principles drive the growth. Women do not use birth control. Couples marry young, and after marriage, they stay and start families. Growth comes simply from the fact that families have many children, and the community builds homes to house them. These are not communities in decline. They are communities in acceleration. The construction cranes visible from nearly every major intersection in Lakewood tell their own story. In a single recent year, the township issued more than 2,000 building permits. Entire blocks of pine forest have given way to rows of townhouses and duplexes, their facades still pale with fresh siding. The commercial corridors have multiplied to match. Where a single kosher supermarket once served the community, there are now dozens, their aisles stocked with products imported from Israel, labeled in Hebrew and English. Wedding halls book events nearly every night of the week except Friday and Saturday. A single hall on a busy Wednesday evening might host 400 guests, the men dancing in one room and the women in another, the music audible from the car park. Caterers, florists, photographers, and musicians have built entire careers serving a population that celebrates weddings the way other towns celebrate holidays. The economic engine is almost entirely internal. Money circulates within the community at a speed that few outside economists have studied closely. A family pays tuition to a yeshiva. The yeshiva pays its teachers. The teachers buy groceries from the kosher market. The market owner donates to the yeshiva. The circle is tight and self-reinforcing, and it explains why Lakewood's commercial vacancy rate remains remarkably low even when surrounding towns struggle to fill their storefronts. And as Lakewood fills, the pattern radiates outward. Lakewood's explosive growth now appears directly responsible for the expansion of its neighbors. Toms River saw 4.6% growth. Jackson saw 3.6%. Kosher grocery chains and Judaica stores have opened branches on the edges of surrounding towns. Developers have pushed further north in Orange County toward the Catskills, searching for quiet villages where the land is still cheap. In newer destinations far from the traditional northeastern corridor, Orthodox families have begun arriving in Orlando, drawn by affordable housing and a growing kosher infrastructure. But growth at this speed does not happen in a vacuum. The expansion that transformed Lakewood from a fading township into the 4th largest municipality in New Jersey has produced real friction with neighboring communities. Residents of nearby towns point to overdevelopment, where multiple family dwellings have replaced single-family houses and natural woodland. They raise concerns about a public school system under fiscal strain. In Toms River, yard signs appeared on front lawns reading, "Do not sell and Toms River strong." The message was not subtle. The economics are genuinely complicated. Tax-exempt properties owned by private schools, charities, and religious institutions make up a significant portion of Lakewood's land value, a figure much higher than in neighboring towns. In Toms River, that figure is 1.5%. The public school system serves a shrinking share of the township's children, while the municipality funds busing for thousands of yeshiva students. Residents outside the Orthodox community feel they are funding a system they do not benefit from. The community responds that its members pay taxes, support local businesses, and generate the economic activity that rescued Lakewood from decades of decline. Neither side is entirely wrong. In Postville, Iowa, the tensions took a different and more painful form. A Lubavitcher businessman named Shalom Rubashkin bought the old meatpacking plant and transformed it into the largest glatt kosher processing facility in the country. A longtime resident named Mel Brink recalled that the newcomers were not accepted at first because people were used to knowing everybody, and suddenly there were all these new faces. But the town was saved from economic collapse. Then on May 12, 2008, Immigration and Customs Enforcement deployed 900 agents and arrested 398 workers at the plant. The company went into bankruptcy. The plant shuttered 5 months later. A local business owner named Aaron Goldsmith described the aftermath simply. He said it was like they dropped a nuclear bomb on the town. A Postville counselor named Bob Schroeder offered his own accounting years later. He said the newcomers had saved the town from what he called a slow death, that the community had been reinvigorated, that there was life again, that he had made many friends from all over the world, and they were very good people. His words carried no romance and no agenda, just an honest reckoning with what he saw. The Jewish community in Postville is noticeably smaller now. About 50 Orthodox families remain, roughly half the number from before the raid. In Tom's River, interfaith dialogues have been initiated between long-standing residents and Orthodox leaders to find common ground. In Orange County, many surrounding communities view Kiryas Joel's rapid expansion and annexation efforts as a threat to the quality of life in neighboring towns. Some places are finding a way through, others are still searching. The story has no ending because it is not finished. Saturday morning in Lakewood. The streets carry that particular silence that comes not from absence, but from intention. Families walk in small groups toward their synagogues. A father holds the hand of a boy who cannot be more than 4. An older man in a black coat walks slowly, unhurried, his prayer book tucked under his arm. The bakeries are shuttered. The car parks are full, but no engine turns over. 82 years ago, a man who had lost nearly everything arrived in a town that was losing the same. He had 14 students and an idea the rest of the world considered impossible. His grandson has said that he was completely countercultural, a man who believed that traditional Judaism could not only survive in America, but flourish. That yeshivas could be built here. That a life organized entirely around study and faith could take root in soil that had never held it before. The streets on this Saturday morning hold no monuments, no plaques, no declarations of what was accomplished. The oldest residents remember when this was a town of boarding houses and empty hotels. The youngest will never know it as anything other than home. And when 3 chapters behind us now, and the country looks different than it did when we began. Every town opened a corridor that was not there a moment ago. A challah cools on a windowsill in a town whose name you would not recognize. You start to wonder how many doors you have walked past without ever turning the handle. But the next chapter of this map does not belong to a small town at all. It belongs to a world built inside one of the most famous cities on earth by families who arrived carrying nothing but a language and a kitchen and a memory of home. Number 10. Houston, Texas might seem an unlikely sanctuary for Persian Jews fleeing the Islamic Revolution, but the energy capital of America offered something invaluable to educated professionals who had lost everything: opportunity. In the years following 1979, Iranian engineers, doctors, and business owners arrived in Houston with university degrees and empty pockets. The energy sector was booming. Jobs existed for those with technical expertise. The city asked few questions about where you came from and only what you could contribute. They settled in the affluent suburbs west of downtown: Memorial, Sugarland, neighborhoods with good schools and large homes where extended families could gather for Friday night dinners. The Iranian Cultural Foundation of Houston became their anchor, offering Persian language classes for children born on American soil and Nowruz celebrations every spring to mark the Persian New Year. These were professionals rebuilding from nothing. A petroleum engineer who had managed refineries in Iran now started at entry level in an American company. A physician who had run a hospital in Tehran now studied to pass American medical boards. They did not complain. They worked. They saved. They bought homes. And within a generation, their children attended the finest universities in America. Houston gave Persian Jews the chance to rebuild their professional lives. But 1,000 miles east, a different kind of sanctuary was forming. For those who needed not just opportunity, but rescue. Number 9. The story of Persian Jews in Baltimore begins with an unlikely hero. Rabbi Hermann Naphtali Neuberger was not Persian. He was born in Bavaria, Germany, an Ashkenazi Jew who had fled the Nazis and built his life in Maryland. But in 1983, he looked at the desperate refugees fleeing Iran and saw his own story reflected back at him. Working alongside Rabbi Moshe Scherer, Rabbi Neuberger persuaded the United States State Department to allow Iranian Jews to seek asylum as political refugees. He did not stop at paperwork. He personally helped nearly 1,000 Persian Jews immigrate to Baltimore. Teenage girls who arrived alone were taken in by local families. Young men were enrolled in his yeshiva without being asked to pay a single dollar. Rabbi Neuberger considered us his children. Those are the words of Rabbi Reuben Aria, who leads the Or HaMizrach congregation today. He helped us with food. He helped us with immigration. He gave our boys an education when we had nothing to offer in return. Today, in the heart of Baltimore's Jewish community, stands an exquisite synagogue reminiscent of an ancient Persian palace. The 20,000 square foot building rises 3 stories high. This is Or HaMizrach, an Orthodox Sephardic Iranian congregation and vibrant community center founded in 1981. The building is dedicated to the memory of the Bavarian rabbi who became a savior to Persian refugees. Rabbi Neuberger gave Persian Jews a lifeline to America. But the largest rescue operation unfolded not on the East Coast, but in a quiet suburb of New York, where an entire community rose from forced conversion. Number 8. Kew Gardens sits in the central area of the New York City borough of Queens. It is a triangular-shaped, middle-class neighborhood, accessible by surrounding expressways and the Kew Gardens Union Turnpike subway station. For decades, it attracted working professionals who wanted garden community living with a quick commute to Manhattan. Around 2,500 Iranian Jews arrived here after the revolution of 1979. They joined immigrants from China, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Israel, the former Soviet Union, India, Bangladesh, and Korea, who had settled in Kew Gardens during the 1980s and the 1990s. The neighborhood offered something precious to refugees starting over: anonymity within diversity. Persian Jews could preserve their traditions without standing out. Their neighbors understood what it meant to rebuild a life far from home. Everyone on the block had a story of leaving something behind. The Jewish population in the Forest Hills, Rego Park, and Kew Gardens areas has grown by 37% since 2002, making it home to one of the fastest-growing Jewish communities in the entire New York metropolitan region. The real estate mix appealed to practical families, cooperative apartments, condominiums, and single-family homes, all within reach of hardworking immigrants willing to sacrifice for their children's futures. Queens offered accessibility and diversity. But for Persian Jews seeking something more insular, a community that could preserve every ancient tradition without compromise, there was only one destination on the East Coast. Number 7. The Iranian Jewish community living on Long Island, New York, is primarily concentrated in the area known as Great Neck. Roughly 15,000 strong today, this community is by far wealthy, educated, and quite observant of Jewish religious practices. But their story begins with one of the most remarkable chapters of survival in Jewish history. The Mashhadi community originated in Mashhad, Iran, a city holy to Shiite Muslims. Persian Jews had lived relatively peacefully there for a century. Then, in March of 1839, everything changed. The Shiite community suddenly revolted against the Jewish population, storming synagogues, destroying sacred Torah scrolls, and killing dozens of people. A few Jews managed to escape, pleading with the local imam to stop the violence. The imam agreed on one condition: the entire Jewish community must immediately convert to Islam. For 86 years, the Mashhadi Jewish community openly practiced Islam. They attended Friday prayers at the mosque. They adopted Muslim names. They observed Islamic customs in public. But from the very beginning, they made a secret pact. Meat would be bought from the open market only to be given to the dogs, while kosher meat was prepared in the confines of Jewish households and distributed secretly from courtyard to courtyard. Although outwardly the community had Muslim names, they were also given secret Hebrew names. Upon return from Friday prayers, families would gather in hidden rooms to welcome the Sabbath. They opened their shops on Shabbat, but charged ridiculously high prices, so as not to conduct any actual business. Children were engaged to one another at very young ages, so that local Muslims would not ask to marry their daughters. For nearly a century, they kept their faith alive through deception. And when they finally arrived in Great Neck, they brought with them not just traditions, but the living memory of what it cost to preserve them. With all of their success, Iranian Jews in New York have kept a fairly low profile over the past 3 decades. The largest concentration lives not here, but 3,000 miles away in Los Angeles. The Mashhadi Jews preserved their faith through secret practice for nearly a century. But when the 1979 revolution came, Persian Jews across all of Iran faced a new terror, and they fled to sanctuaries across America. Number 6. Miami might seem an obvious choice for refugees seeking warmth and new beginnings, but the specific enclaves where Persian Jews settled tell a more particular story. Surfside and Ball Harbor, 2 small municipalities on the Barrier Islands north of Miami Beach, became home to a remarkably diverse Jewish community. Sephardic traditions from Spain and North Africa, Ashkenazi customs from Eastern Europe, and Persian practices from Iran, all mixed together within a few square blocks of oceanfront high-rises. The luxury condominiums attracted successful Persian business people who had managed to transfer some wealth before fleeing Iran. Beachfront living, year-round sunshine, multiple synagogues serving different traditions within walking distance. For those who could afford it, this was paradise rebuilt. The community became known for something that cannot be measured in real estate prices: warmth. Visitors describe being welcomed like extended family. Strangers invited to Shabbat dinners, neighbors checking on one another daily. The kind of community that takes generations to build elsewhere seemed to spring up naturally under the Florida sun. The June 2021 Surfside building collapse struck this close-knit community with devastating force. The Champlain Towers South condominium had been home to many Jewish families. The tragedy revealed to the outside world just how interconnected these lives had become. Persian restaurants and businesses now operate alongside Cuban, Israeli, and American Jewish establishments. 3 cultures of exile finding common ground on a strip of sand between the Atlantic Ocean and Biscayne Bay. Florida offered sun and sea and synagogues for every tradition. But Persian Jews seeking familiar landscapes, mountains and dry heat and sprawling homes with room for extended families found their Eden further west. Number 5. La Jolla, the jewel of the San Diego coastline, attracted Persian Jewish professionals drawn to its excellent schools, Mediterranean climate, and distance from the chaos of revolution. The region made history when Iraj Bruman served as a prominent leader in local administration, paving the way for Iranian Americans in civic life. His election demonstrated how quickly Persian Jews could integrate into American civic life while maintaining their distinct identity. The stories of individual resilience multiply across San Diego County. Families who lost everything in Iran rebuilt through small businesses. A jeweler who had owned shops in Tehran started over with a single display case. A restaurateur who had employed dozens in Iran now worked alone in a tiny kitchen, slowly building back. The journey from Tehran to America often meant leaving parents behind, siblings scattered across continents, entire lives abandoned with no possibility of return. The Shah's supporters faced particular danger. Staying meant prison or worse. Leaving meant never seeing home again. Real estate in La Jolla's coastal neighborhoods commanded premium prices even then, but Persian families prioritized schools above all else. Education had saved them before. It would save them again. Within one generation, children of refugees were attending Stanford, Berkeley, and UCLA, becoming doctors and lawyers and professors, repaying their parents' sacrifices with achievements beyond anything imagined in those first desperate years. San Diego offered refuge to those who built businesses from nothing. But the Persian Jews who truly transformed American real estate gathered further north, in a valley most Americans only know from television. Number 4. The San Fernando Valley stretches north of the Hollywood Hills, a vast suburban expanse of shopping centers and ranch homes and wide boulevards baking under the California sun. Most Americans know it only as the setting for films and television shows. What they do not see is one of the most widely dispersed Persian Jewish communities in Southern California. The San Fernando Valley is home to a massive Jewish population of over 100,000, with Persian Jews forming a vibrant cornerstone of that community along the Ventura Boulevard corridor. They settled along the 101 corridor, Tarzana, Encino, Sherman Oaks. Neighborhoods that offered something Beverly Hills could not: space. Persian families value proximity across generations. Grandparents want to live near grandchildren. Cousins gather weekly, not annually. Friday night Shabbat dinners might include 30 people around a table. This requires room. The valley's larger lots and ranch-style homes could accommodate extended families under one roof or on the same block. Modest properties from the 1950s and the 1960s gave way to larger constructions as Persian families prospered and expanded. A 3-bedroom ranch became a 6-bedroom home, then a complete rebuild. The architecture changed as the community grew. Persian restaurants and bakeries now dot Ventura Boulevard. The smell of saffron rice and grilled kebab drifts from kitchen vents. Signs in Farsi appear in strip mall windows. Synagogues adapted their services to accommodate mixed Ashkenazi, Sephardic, and Persian congregations, sometimes offering 3 different prayer traditions under a single roof. Children attend both American public schools and Persian cultural programs on weekends. They grow up bilingual, bicultural. American in the classroom and Persian at the dinner table. The valley offered space for sprawling families and Friday night feasts, but the true center of Persian Jewish power, the place that would reshape American politics and culture, lies just over the hills. Number 3. Walking down Westwood Boulevard in Los Angeles feels like stepping through a portal. The signs change. Neon letters in Persian script advertise restaurants and bookstores and travel agencies. Billboards feature faces and words unreadable to most Americans passing through. In 2010, the city of Los Angeles officially designated Westwood Boulevard between Wilshire and Santa Monica as Persian Square. 2 years later, Google Maps officially recognized Tehrangeles as a place name. A community that had existed for 3 decades finally received formal acknowledgement from the institutions of American life. The Kitab Corporation operated the largest publisher of Persian language titles outside Iran from its iconic bookstore on Westwood Boulevard. Novels banned in Tehran sat openly on shelves, poetry collections, political memoirs, children's books in Farsi for American-born generations. The store closed in 2017, but the cultural mission continues through other institutions. What strikes visitors most is the extraordinary rate of business ownership. An estimated 82% of Iranian Jews in Los Angeles are self-employed. They own the restaurants, they own the shops, they own the commercial properties that house both. This is not accident, but culture. In Iran, Jews had been merchants and traders for millennia. They brought those skills to America and deployed them immediately. The coffee houses and tea rooms operate exactly as they did in Tehran. Old men play backgammon. Younger people argue politics. The Persian language fills the air, punctuated occasionally by English when an outsider enters. Westwood gave Persian Jews a public face. But the community's true wealth and political influence was concentrated in one of America's most famous postcodes. Number 2. After the 1979 Iranian Revolution, approximately 30,000 Iranian Jews settled in Beverly Hills and the surrounding area. As of 2007, about 8,000 Iranians lived within the city limits, roughly 20% of the total population. The majority of those Iranians were Jewish. Iranian Jews who lost funds in Iran adapted with remarkable speed. They brought high education levels, business experience, and some overseas funds that had escaped seizure. Within years, they were not just surviving, they were thriving. In 2007, ballots for Beverly Hills city elections began printing in Persian. That same year, Jimmy Delshad, a Persian Jew, became mayor of Beverly Hills. He was the city's first mayor of Iranian descent, and at that time the highest-ranking Persian political office holder in American history. The real estate transformation began in the 1970s, even before the revolution. Persian Jewish families started buying properties in Beverly Hills, attracted by excellent schools, an existing Jewish community, and the city's reputation for safety and wealth. After 1979, the trickle became a flood. Persian architect Hamid Omrani built around 200 mansions in the Beverly Hills area. Critics called them Persian palaces, with grand entrances, marble columns, and ornate details that referenced ancient Persepolis. The aesthetic proved so dominant that in 2004, the Beverly Hills City Council established a committee to examine new house designs. Nessa Synagogue was founded in 1980 for the wave of Persian Jewish immigration. Rabbi David Shofet, son of the chief rabbi of Iran, led the congregation in continuing the traditions his father had preserved in Tehran. The congregation's name, Nessa, means eternal in Hebrew. It captures their mission exactly, to continue where Iran's Jewish community left off. Beverly Hills gave Persian Jews political power and social standing, but the true scale of what they built, the entire hidden civilization, can only be understood when you see the full picture. Number 1. The United States is home to between 60,000 and 80,000 Iranian Jews, most of them settled in the greater Los Angeles area. More Persian Jews live in Los Angeles today than anywhere else in the world, an estimated 45,000, roughly twice the number remaining in Iran itself. With population estimates reaching 700,000, Southern California now boasts the largest concentration of Iranians anywhere in the world outside Iran. They have homes in Beverly Hills, Bel Air, Brentwood, and Encino. Ivy League degrees hang on their walls. They work as doctors, lawyers, producers, and bankers. Los Angeles was ideal because it reminded them of home, the landscape, the mountains rising from the basin, the dry heat, the car culture where everyone drives everywhere. Even the light felt familiar to those who had grown up under Persian skies. On the eve of the Islamic Revolution in 1979, there were 80,000 Jews in Iran. Within months of the revolution, 20,000 had fled. By the time the exodus slowed, some 60,000 Iranian Jews had left their homeland. Of those, 35,000 came to the United States. They built complete infrastructure from nothing. Persian language television stations broadcast news and entertainment. Radio programs play traditional music. Newspapers report on community affairs in Farsi. Schools teach children to read and write in the language of their grandparents. The Center for Iranian Jewish Oral History now works to connect younger generations to the stories. Interviews with elders who remember Tehran before the revolution, recordings of traditions that might otherwise fade, the conscious preservation of memory itself. We love being Persian. We love Iran. We are not Israelis, but we love that Israel exists. This sentiment echoes through the community, an identity that holds multiple loyalties without contradiction. Many of the American-born generation grew up speaking Farsi at home, but English everywhere else. Their childhoods were more Jewish than Persian in some families, more Persian than Jewish in others. The balance shifted from household to household, but the dual identity remained. Today, a complete civilization operates within America's second-largest city. Its own media, its own politics, its own cuisine distinct from both Israeli and Middle Eastern food, its own architecture, visible in the mansions of Beverly Hills, its own religious institutions, preserving traditions from Mashhad and Tehran and Isfahan, its own cultural memory, passed from grandparents to grandchildren at Shabbat tables set with Persian rice and American wine. The next generation speaks Farsi in Beverly Hills living rooms. They attend synagogues their grandparents built. They eat foods their great-grandmothers prepared in Tehran kitchens. They carry forward 2,700 years of continuous history that most Americans walking past their homes will never see. A mezuzah sits on a door frame on a boulevard where the shop front has gone dark for the evening. The street holds the last warmth of the afternoon. But the final chapter of this map belongs to a neighborhood that most New Yorkers walk past every single day without knowing what was being built beside them. Not built in secret, built in plain sight, in the hours before the city woke and after it collapsed into sleep. Built in storefronts and basements and rented halls that smelled of old wood and new purpose. The people who built it were not waiting to be discovered. They were not building for the city that ignored them. They were building for each other, which is the only reason anything lasting ever gets built at all. An estimated 50,000 Bukharian Jews now live in these neighborhoods. That makes this the second largest Bukharian Jewish community on Earth. Only Israel has more. In Bukhara itself, the ancient city in Uzbekistan where this civilization was born, perhaps 100 Jews remain. The entire heartland emptied. It reassembled here. On 108th Street, between 63rd and 65th Avenues, a strip the community calls Bukharian Broadway, the signs are in Cyrillic and the lingua franca is Russian. Kosher meat markets stand beside fruit vendors. Travel agencies sit next to fabric shops selling ikat textiles in patterns that have not changed in 3 centuries. Those textiles carry a deeper history than most visitors realize. Bukharian Jews once dominated the silk trade in Central Asia. In 30 years, the number of synagogues in these neighborhoods grew from 1 to more than 40. A museum in Elmhurst holds over 2,000 items, including a Torah 400 years old. The air here smells like cumin and baking bread. Women carry bags of round flatbread from bakeries where tandoor ovens glow against the back wall. This is not a neighborhood in transition. This is a neighborhood that has already been remade. The question is how a people cut off from the rest of the Jewish world for more than 2,000 years carried their language and their music and their food across the ocean and rebuilt everything they had lost in the residential blocks of a borough most of New York had stopped paying attention to. The answer begins a very long time ago. Bukharian Jews are one of the oldest Jewish diaspora groups on Earth. Their roots trace to the Babylonian exile. They are also one of the oldest ethno-religious communities in Central Asia. The name Bukharian means of Bukhara, the ancient city on the Silk Road, where Jews fleeing the persecution of the Persian king Boroughs began to settle in the 5th century. For most of their history, they were cut off from the wider Jewish world. They survived waves of Muslim, Uzbek, and Russian invaders while preserving their faith and their identity across millennia. That continuity is almost impossible to overstate. This is a community that predates the Roman Empire. It now lives 30 minutes by subway from Times Square. In the late 18th century, a Moroccan rabbi named Joseph Maman Maghribi arrived in Bukhara and reshaped everything. He found a community that had preserved its Judaism in near total isolation, and he gave it a new liturgical framework. The Bukharian Jews, historically Mizrahi, adopted Sephardic customs under his influence. That grafting of traditions is part of what makes their religious life unlike any other branch of Judaism. Then came the 70 years that nearly destroyed it all. Under Soviet rule, the regime cracked down on organized religion. The dissemination of religious information was halted. Russian was forced on the region as the only acceptable language. The Bukharian language itself, Bukhari, is a dialect of Persian blended with Hebrew and Aramaic. It was used for all cultural and educational life among Central Asian Jews for centuries. By 1940, the Soviet regime had banned its promotion entirely. One elder Bukharian man in Queens, who would not give his name, once explained that Soviet rule forced them to practice their faith in secret. To be known was to be vulnerable. He said they used to wrap their Torah portions in Pravda newspapers. That single detail rewires how you understand everything that follows. A people who hid scripture inside state propaganda and then carried it out. The exodus from Central Asia to the United States began slowly in the 1970s and accelerated through the 80s. When the Soviet Union collapsed, waves of Bukharian Jews left for America and Israel. Some left for economic reasons. Others feared what might happen if an Islamist government came to power in Uzbekistan. As an ethnic minority, most Bukharian Jews were not proficient in the Uzbek language. They were excluded from nation building. Many were denied university admission. Others were dismissed from state employment. The new independence offered no place for them. They did not arrive in New York randomly. The New York Association for New Americans, founded in 1949, provided resettlement assistance to over 250,000 Jewish refugees from the former Soviet Union. It was this agency that steered the Bukharian arrivals toward Forest Hills and Rego Park. Zana Shimon, an associate broker who lives in the community, recalls that her family was forced to leave the Soviet Union in 1989 during violent unrest between Uzbeks and Turks. There was a military curfew. Soldiers stood every 10 meters. It was too dangerous to stay. They were allowed to leave with $90 per person and 5 grams of gold. Shimon has said that Bukharians chose Queens because they like to live in community. One settles and the others follow, and follow they did. The first Bukharian synagogue in New York, the Bukharian Jewish Community Center, had been established in 1963 on 70th Avenue between Austin Street and Queens Boulevard. It served the small number of Jews who had managed to leave Central Asia after the Second World War. By 1978, the community numbered about 1,000. They pooled their money, secured large contributions from wealthier members, took out a bank loan, bought a house on 112th Street, renovated it, and turned it into a synagogue. That was the anchor. Everything else grew around it. The community center today is more than a synagogue. It houses meeting rooms, social halls, a center for senior citizens, and the headquarters of the Bukharian Times newspaper. Boris Nektalov, a criminal defense attorney born in Samarkand who immigrated with his family at the age of 8, walks through the building greeting staff and fellow members in Russian with a handshake or a hug. Like many in the community, he is trilingual in English, Russian, and Bukhari. His father, Raphael, serves as editor-in-chief of the Bukharian Times. Boris organizes community events and chases down leads for articles alongside him. The newspaper circulates weekly, alongside another publication called Druzhba. Both are free and found in local businesses, synagogues, and restaurants throughout Queens. On a weekday afternoon, 108th Street hums with a specific kind of life. The Rawcott Kosher Bakery is an unadorned space filled with the scent of fresh dough. Bakers press rounds of noni toki against the curved clay wall of a tandoor oven. It takes between 10 and 15 minutes to bake each loaf. The breads are used as part of weekly Shabbat celebrations. Beside the tandoor loaves sit trays of samsa, meat-filled pastries folded into triangles, and stacks of chak, a fried honey cake whose name means chatter. The bakery has no decoration to speak of. The bread is the decoration. Down the block, the supermarkets tell their own story. Soviet-style grocers like Gastronome and Netcost stock shelves with Central Asian staples. Yellow carrots for PLOV sit beside bundles of fresh dill and cilantro. Whole heads of garlic fill bins near bags of chickpeas and black currants. Plov, the national dish of Uzbekistan, is the centerpiece of every Bukharian gathering. At weddings, a single cauldron can feed 1,000 guests. Then there is Oshi Sabo, the Bukharian answer to the Ashkenazi kolet. It is a meal in a pot, rice and meat and vegetables and dried fruit, cooked slowly overnight and eaten hot for Shabbat lunch. The fruit gives it a sweet and sour taste, unlike anything else in the Jewish culinary world. Further down the boulevard, the catering halls tell a different story. On any given night, restaurants like King David on Queens Boulevard are filled with Bukharian families celebrating weddings or lighting memorial candles for lost relatives. King David, founded by Abo Shakarov in 1998, has hosted thousands of weddings, bar mitzvah ceremonies, and Passover seders. At Passover, families wear the joma, a colorful Bukharian kaftan embroidered with gold thread. Both men and women dress in it because it represents royalty and freedom. The tradition may date to a time under the Bukharan Emirate, when discriminatory laws forced Jews to wear distinct, drab clothing to mark their second-class status. Instead of accepting shame, they chose the most luxurious garments they could afford. Lana Levitin, a real estate broker and manager of the Bukharian musical ensemble Makam, explains that every day, every restaurant is full. With 50,000 Jews, everyone has someone to remember. Memorial celebrations called Yushvo are held annually for family members who have died. Weddings draw 300 to 500 guests on average. The community once had to travel to Great Neck on Long Island for these events. Then, the catering halls started appearing in Queens, and they never had to leave again. The music inside those halls carries a weight that most listeners do not immediately understand. Shash Makom is a classical music tradition born in the courts of Central Asia. The word means 6 modes or 6 makams. For centuries, under the patronage of the Bukharian Emirates, Jewish and Muslim musicians worked side by side to develop it into one of the most sophisticated classical systems in the world. In 2003, UNESCO included Shash Makom on its list of intangible cultural heritage. Fatima Queenova, a founding member and vocalist of the Shash Makom Ensemble, received a National Heritage Fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts in 1992. In 2012, the Congress of Bukharian Jews of the United States and Canada organized the first Shash Makom Forever Festival at Carnegie Hall. The court music of Bukharian emirs, nearly destroyed by Soviet cultural policy, performed under the chandeliers of one of the most famous concert halls on earth. David Mavashev, a Tajik-born Jew who runs the Iskak Mavashev Foundation named for his father, and historian of Shash Makom, says the music is never the same twice. He compares it to jazz. Every time it is new. On a Tuesday evening in Forest Hills, the ensemble rehearses in a conference room. The tambur and the dwar and the tar fill a space designed for quarterly budget meetings. No account of this music in Queens is complete without Malayev. Born in 1936 in the city of Merv, in what is now Turkmenistan, Malayev learned to play the tar and the tanbur as a child. In Tashkent, tens of thousands of fans filled stadiums to hear him perform. The Soviet state named him Honored Artist of the Uzbek SSR. But because he was Jewish, he could not get his poetry published. He emigrated to Queens in 1992. He shared a 3-room apartment with 9 people and survived on welfare. He borrowed money to self-publish 1,000 copies of his poetry collection called Milk and Sugar. He gave performances in his apartment. He died in Forest Hills in 2008 at the age of 72. Walter Feldman, an expert on Ottoman Turkish music, once said Malayev was one of maybe half a dozen people in the world with such deep knowledge of the Shash Makom. A man who filled stadiums in Uzbekistan played his final concerts in a living room in Queens. The man who has worked hardest to preserve all of this in physical form is Aaron Aronov. He is described as a legendary figure in the community. Aronov worked as a translator in Tashkent and proudly recalls that he translated for Richard Nixon when the president visited Uzbekistan. He moved to the United States in 1989 and founded the Bukharian Jewish Museum. His collection now exceeds 1,000 items. The museum occupies 2 cramped classrooms that a local school lent him. Inside those rooms are textiles and Torah scrolls and photographs and musical instruments that span centuries. Aronov has said that New York is not a melting pot but a mosaic of different groups, and that his mission is to make sure the Bukharian piece of that mosaic does not disappear. 1 man, 2 borrowed classrooms, the material memory of an entire civilization. The community grew so fast that the original settlement spilled over its borders. Queens Boulevard between the 63rd Drive and 67th Avenue subway stops now functions as a second Bukharian Broadway. Families expanded into Rego Park, then further into Kew Gardens Hills, Fresh Meadows, and Jamaica Estates. Community observers note that the Bukharian residents of Kew Gardens Hills tend to be younger, better educated, and more religious than their parents and grandparents who stayed in Forest Hills. They are more comfortable in English than in Russian. The older generation became entrepreneurs, shoemakers, hairdressers, jewelers, real estate agents, caterers. The younger generation fills medical schools and law firms and accounting offices. Journals and newspapers circulate weekly, mostly in Russian. 3 theater troupes perform regularly. At least a dozen synagogues, all Orthodox, serve the community alongside day schools and yeshivot and youth groups. And on Friday evening, when Shabbat begins, the tables in these homes groan under the weight of what is being served. Every Bukharian Sabbath opens with a dish of fried fish covered in a pounded sauce of garlic and cilantro. There will always be meat. Community members joke that if you have a meal without meat, then you need to eat a little more later. 3 or 4 generations sit at the same table. Russian and Bukhari and English move between courses like the food itself. But a community that builds this visibly does not go unnoticed. To Bukharian Jews, a large house is not vanity, it is tradition. A place to shelter multiple generations, to host weddings and memorials and holiday dinners, to affirm that the family has survived. In the Kordmeyer section of Forest Hills, an upper-middle-class neighborhood long cherished for its quiet Tudor and Georgian and Cape Cod homes, Bukharian families began tearing down the older houses and erecting white brick edifices with sweeping balustrades and stone lions flanking the front steps. Albert Dayan, an attorney and Bukharian Jew who grew up in Queens, has explained that the new homes are larger because they need to be. The average Bukharian household includes 3 generations and about 4 children. A Tudor cottage cannot hold that. The neighbors did not see tradition. They saw disruption. Turquoise columns and gold leaf iron fences clashed with the sedate character of the surrounding streets. Richard Hellenbrecht, vice president of the Queens Civic Congress, called the new homes an absolute disgrace and said that lovely, affordable houses were being squeezed out. In 2009, the Department of City Planning adjusted building requirements for the Kordmeyer area to limit what it called out-of-character construction. Then in 2015, a series of arson attacks targeted the community. 5 of 7 fires struck Bukharian homes, all buildings under construction and uninhabited. Investigators speculated that the attacks were connected to the years of controversy over the new architecture. Boris Kandov, president of the Bukharian Jewish Congress, has attributed the community's building style to something deeper than taste. He speaks of dreams of affluence, security, and symbolic freedom. A people who hid their faith inside Pravda newspapers now build homes that refuse to hide anything. Inside the community, a different tension runs quietly. Emanuel Rybakov, who teaches a course on Bukharian history and culture at Queens College, has said that the community is successfully integrating into American Jewish society, but at the same time losing a great deal of its ethnic culture. Rabbi Itzhak Yehoshua, the chief rabbi of the Bukharian Jews in the United States, estimates that about 20% of the community is Orthodox, 60% is traditional but not fully observant, and 20% is unaffiliated. He has said that he urges modesty among his congregation to ease tensions with neighbors, but that he meets resistance. Community members tell him that their home is their fortress, their place of entertainment. They work very hard, and this is their understanding of America. The narrator of this story does not resolve the tension because it is not resolved. The zoning codes changed. The homes kept rising. The music kept playing. Friday afternoon on 108th Street. The bakeries run their last tandoor rounds before sundown. A grandmother in a long dress carries a bag of round flatbread under one arm and holds the hand of a small child with the other. They walk toward a white brick house on a residential street where the iron gate stands open. Through the ground floor window, a table is already set. The platters are large enough for 4 generations. Somewhere inside, the smell of fried fish and garlic rises toward the ceiling. 500 years ago in Bukhara, you would have heard shashmakom drifting from the palace of an emir. Now it drifts from a conference room in Forest Hills. Aaron Aronov once said he was not afraid to die. but he was afraid to disappear from this world without leaving any trace. The gate closes. The bread is still warm. The small American towns are still there. The shop fronts that were boarded when we began are not all boarded anymore. The doors opened. Not because a policy changed or a grant arrived or someone in a distant office finally looked at a map. Because people showed up. Because they came back or they never left. And they decided that leaving was not the only option a place deserved. The lights came on. The windows got cleaned. Someone hung a sign. And then another sign. And the street, which had forgotten what it was for, began to remember.